Greetings. Father Mark signing on, continuing our survey through the 13th century. Last time we got up to the death of Pope Alexander IV. He died on May 25th, 1261, after a reign of 6 years and 5 months. Jacques Pantalion, or Pantalion, is a striking interruption of the pattern thus far that we've seen in the 13th century of popes being younger sons of aristocratic families. Jacques was the son of a cobbler in Troyes, France, who obtained an education through ecclesiastical service. He studied theology and law at the University of Paris, which we can now start calling the Sorbonne for reasons we covered last time, after which he was appointed a canon of Lyon and later archdeacon in Liesh. At the First Council of Lyon in 1245, he attracted the attention of Pope Innocent IV, who accepted him into papal service. Among his duties were 2 missions to Germany. One of the missions was to negotiate the Treaty of Christburg between the pagan Prussians and the Teutonic Knights, one of the military religious orders we covered previously. He did well in these assignments, so he was awarded by being ordained Bishop of Verdun in 1253. In 1255, Pope Alexander IV made him Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem. Pantaleon was at Viterbo, Italy, seeking help for the plight of Christians in the East when Pope Alexander IV died. After a 3-month sede vacante, Pantaleon accepted election as Pope 182 on August 29th, 1261. He reigned under the papal name Urban IV for 3 years and 2 months. 1 month earlier, but before the cardinals could have known, or before the new pope could have known, the Latin Empire in Constantinople fell. Recall that was created by the fallen Crusade, by the Fourth Crusade in 1204, for reasons I already discussed, so I won't repeat it, but you should have it in your notes. So the background of the fall. The Byzantine Emperor Michael VIII, Palaeologus, was a general, previously had been a general in the Greek army, with many ties of lineage to the nobility. In 1259, he took advantage of the death of the previous emperor, who left behind an 8-year-old heir. So that wasn't going to last. So the general, the strategos, Michael, availed himself of the opportunity, seized the throne for himself, after which he had the 8-year-old heir, legitimate heir, blinded and confined to a monastery for the rest of his life. Since the Latins had captured Constantinople during the fallen Fourth Crusade in 1204, the Byzantine emperors had been ruling from Nicaea on the eastern side, the Anatolian side of the Aegean Sea in present-day Turkey. During its 57 years of existence, the Latin Empire, based in Constantinople, proved to be one of the most spectacularly inept governments in all of human history. The corruption of the Norman thugs who had occupied Greek territory was only exceeded by their brutality. The situation was so bad that Constantinople, which had once been home to nearly 1 million people, had fallen to a population of 35,000 by 1261. The original, now that doesn't mean they all died. Many they just left because essentially there was functionally was anarchy because these were just goons. The original Norman conquerors were dead by this point, and their heirs had been raised in a dissipated environment without the military training that made the Normans so feared and so effective on the battlefield. So it turned out to be a small matter for the new Byzantine Emperor Michael VIII to recapture Constantinople from them, which was accomplished by July 25th, 1261. As it happened, there was not even a battle required because no one could muster the energy to put up a fight. Encouraged by this supine display, Michael proceeded to move down into the rest of Greece, driving out the drunken, dissipated heirs of the Normans who had imposed feudalism on the Greek population after conquering Constantinople in 1204. 3 years after this event, 3 years after the Byzantines got their capital back, unconnected, but just happened to be 3 years later, the feast of Corpus Christi, the body of Christ, was instituted by the new Pope, Urban IV, on August 11th, 1264, in the papal bull Transitoris. And remember, bull, I know it doesn't sound right in English, but that's from the Latin bulla, meaning a seal. So it just means it's an official papal document because it has the seal on it. This feast introduces us to Saint Juliana of Liesh. She was born in near Liège, in a village outside of Liège, which is in Belgium, in 1193. She was orphaned at the age of 5. Her relatives gave her to the Augustinian convent of Mont Cornelion, near Liège. In 1206, she took vows as a religious and was assigned care of the sick. In 1230, she was elected superior of the community. She received an infused grace in the form of a vision of the full moon, bright white, but having one dark spot, which she, as part of the grace, she discerned the meaning of that image was a message from the divinity, private revelation, of course. So but still private, that signifying that the church had that spot was an absence of full, complete devotion to the Eucharist. She confided this to the Bishop of Liège, Robert of Thorette, as well as to a Dominican friar working in the area, Friar Hugh of Saint-Cher, who later became a cardinal. Another she confided in was none other than Jacques Pantalion, at that time Archdeacon of Liège, later Bishop of Verdun, Patriarch of Jerusalem, and of course Pope Urban IV. So that's the background. He remembered her in the devotion to the Eucharist that she had, and Bishop Robert in Liège, on his own authority, had started promoting some Eucharistic devotions. But of course now, Urban's Pope, he's in a position to do more. Pope Urban asked St. Thomas Aquinas, the great Dominican theologian, to compose text for the Mass and the office for the Feast of Corpus Christi, which included some famous hymns, such as the Pangelingua, the Panis Angelicus, and the last two stanzas of the Pangelingua are the Tantum Ergo, is the setting, Tantum Ergo, which is often used at benediction, along with the O Salutaris. Corpus Christi was originally celebrated on the Thursday after Trinity Sunday, because the logic was that this would replicate the Eucharistic focus of Holy Thursday, but just be about the Eucharist. On Holy Thursday, there's a number of things that are going on, but this Corpus Christi would take as one of the things we celebrate on Holy Thursday. Of course, is the institution of the Eucharist, the Last Supper. But there are also other things that that are in the readings for Holy Thursday. But this would extract just the Eucharistic focus of Holy Thursday and add that in to the liturgical calendar annually. The opening line of the papal bull is Transitoris de hoc mundo ad patrem salutor Dominus noster Jesus Christus. Translated, as he was about to pass on from this world, Transitoris, to the Father, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And then it goes on like that. So it's obviously referring to the Last Supper. So, right in the first line, we get that association. So here's an excerpt of the document. Quote, Urban, Bishop, servant of the servants of God, to the venerable brothers, patriarchs, archbishops, bishops, and other prelates of the Church, health and apostolic blessing. About to pass from this world to the Father, our Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, since the time of his passion was at hand, instituted the great and wonderful sacrament of his body and blood, bestowing his body as food and his blood as drink. For as often as we eat this bread and drink this cup, we announce the death of the Lord. Indeed, at the institution of this sacrament, he himself said to the apostles, do this in memory of me. So that for us, the special and outstanding memorial of his love would be this venerable sacrament, a memorial in which we attain the corporal presence of the Savior himself. Other things which we remember, we embrace spiritually and mentally. We do not thereby obtain their real presence. However, in this sacramental commemoration, Jesus Christ is present with us in his proper substance, although under another form. As he was about to ascend to heaven, he said to his apostles and their helpers, I will be with you all days, even unto the consummation of the world. He comforted them with a gracious promise that he would remain and would be with them, even by his corporeal presence. Therefore, he gave himself as nourishment, so that, since man fell by the means of the food of the death-giving tree, man is raised up by the means of the food of the life-giving tree. Eating wounded us, and eating healed us. Thus the Savior says, my flesh is real food. This bread is taken, but truly not consumed, because it is not transformed into the eater. Rather, if it is worthily received, the recipient is conformed to it. We should celebrate continuously the memory of this memorial, because the more frequently his gift and favor are looked upon, so much the more firmly are they kept in memory. Therefore, although this memorial sacrament is frequented in the daily solemnities of the Mass, we nevertheless think suitable and worthy that at least once a year, especially to confound the lack of faith and the infamy of heretics, a more solemn and honorable memorial of this sacrament be held. This is so because on Holy Thursday, the day on which the Lord himself instituted this sacrament, the universal Church, occupied with the reconciliation of penitents, blessing of chrism, fulfilling the commandments about the washing of the feet, and many other such things, is not sufficiently free to celebrate so great a sacrament. Moreover, we know that while we were constituted in a lesser office, it was divinely revealed to certain Catholics that a feast of this kind should be celebrated generally throughout the Church. Therefore, to strengthen and exalt the Catholic faith, we decree that besides the daily memory that the Church makes of this sacrament, there be celebrated a more solemn and special annual memorial. Then let the hearts and mouths of all break forth in hymns of saving joy. Then let faith sing, hope dance, charity exult, devotion applaud, the choir be jubilant, and purity delight. Then let each one with willing spirit and prompt will come together, laudably fulfilling his duties, celebrating the solemnity of so great a feast. As with so many popes of the and Corpus Christi is still celebrated. It's still part of the liturgical calendar, but it's been moved to a Sunday now. It's no longer celebrated on a Thursday. But apart from that, that is the teaching of the church. It is the real presence of Christ, and we do celebrate the institution of the Eucharist at Holy Thursday, but yet again on the Corpus Christi, we celebrate just that. Whereas Holy Thursday, we celebrate that plus a number of other things. As with so many popes of this period, Pope Urban IV's preference for ecclesiastical affairs was not allowed pursuit without distraction from political and military threats to the independence of the Papal States. And so, much to his chagrin, Urban had his part in the ongoing church-state conflict with the Holy Roman Empire. The generation-long installment of that drama against the Emperor Frederick II, von Hohenzollern, von Hohenstaufen. Hohenzollerns a later dynasty, but the von Hohenstaufens, ended with the death of Frederick II on December 13th, 1250. As with so many prideful men who devoted Herculean energy to undermining the church, at the end, he hypocritically returned, but too late to undo the damage he caused. When he experienced a sudden attack of dysentery, he panicked and sought refuge at the nearest monastery, which happened to be Cistercian, located in Apulia, Italy. He went to confession, received extreme unction, as they called it then, last rites, and begged to be allowed to wear the habit of a Cistercian novice. In this frame of mind, he commanded that all the church lands he had stolen be returned, and all the prelates that he kidnapped, wrongfully imprisoned, which remember he was first excommunicated for kidnapping 2 cardinals, but that was at the First Council of Lyon. But that wasn't all. He kidnapped bishops that were loyal to the Pope, abbots who were loyal to the Pope, for all the way down to pressure them, to torture them, to steal from them, intimidate. So that now, at the end, he commands they all be freed. He then committed the folly that we've seen so often in the medieval course, as far back as the Merovingians. After devoting a lifetime to expanding his empire by conquest, theft, purchase, betrayal, in his will, he did it again. He divided it. As we've seen all the way back to the Merovingians, they did that. Those are the Salic law. His eldest surviving son, Conrad, was bequeathed the imperial title and the crowns of the 2 Sicilies, the Naples and Sicily. An illegitimate son named Manfred received the Principality of Taranto in southern Italy. Another son, Heinrich, received the old kingdom of Arles in southern France, which hadn't existed in centuries. Remember, go way back to the Merovingians to see the different kingdoms that comprised France. So he revived that in order to give it to Heinrich. And to a grandson, who, just for the sake of confusion, was also named Heinrich. Heinrich received the Duchy of Austria and what was called the March of Styria, which is next to Austria. To the astonishment of the world, this arrangement lasted 4 entire years until Conrad died suddenly, officially of malaria, On May 21st, 1254, I laugh. I'm not laughing at malaria. It's just because obviously he was poisoned. He died at the age of 26. His 2-year-old son, Conradin, then inherited. And again, to the mirabile dictu, wondrous to behold. Conradin managed to survive until the age of 16, when he was captured and beheaded by his illegitimate half-brother, Manfred. So it went on and on in this way. You get the picture. The significance of all of this for our story is that whomever claimed the imperial title, Holy Roman Emperor, automatically had a claim on Lombardy, which is northern Italy, as well as Naples, southern Italy, and the island of Sicily off the coast. This left the papal state trapped in between. So no pope, however much he might wish to do so, could ever afford to ignore imperial politics. Urban IV concluded, as had many previous popes, that outside help was needed. He chose to go for the French, because the French and the Germans hate each other. So if he has problems with the Germans, there's a good chance that the French will help, just because they hate the Germans, if for no other reason. But in this case, there was another reason that he might get help in France, because the King of France was a saint, literally, Louis IX, the King of France. So those of you for the parish where watching this, yes, this is our patron saint, St. Louis, King of France. Louis IX, King Louis IX, St. Louis, had a younger brother, Charles of Anjou, whom we shall meet again, as that's the one that Urban went to for help against the Germans. But to conclude Urban's story, he traveled to Perugia in furtherance of orchestrating this French assistance against the Germans, visiting the city-states to strengthen the Guelphs against the Ghibellines. So we talked about this in the medieval course, so I won't but for those of you who didn't have me for that, I'll just... So Guelph is spelled Guelph. That is an Italian rendering of the German house of Welf, Welf. That was the dynasty that, at the time that these terms developed, were the Dukes of Bavaria. Ghibelline is spelled Ghibelline. That is the Italian rendering of the town in which a castle exists, the castle of Weilbellingen, in Germany. So Weilbellingen, Ghibelline. That was the ancestral home of the House of Hohenstaufen, which is, held the imperial title, as we covered. So the Guelphs, the short way for the Guelphs, were pro-papal. The Ghibellines were pro-imperial. To put it in another way, the Guelphs favored local autonomy in the empire, within the Holy Roman Empire, meaning a weak central government. So I know that this analogy, I understand that this analogy is far-fetched, but to make it some kind of connection, in American terms, the Guelphs would be the states' rights people. Those who want a weak federal government but stronger state governments. whereas the Ghibellines, the pro-imperials, were those who favored a strong central government, a strong emperor, centralized government, with weak local governments dependent on the emperor. So dukes, counts, barons, they would be weak and more independent on the emperor. So whenever Pope and Emperor, whenever we had any of these church-state disputes between Pope and Emperor, in all the Italian cities, all the German cities, and anywhere that the Germans were involved, these two factions developed. And it wasn't only Pope against Emperor, that these philosophical differences also perpetuated. So you had, it's like two gangs in each city, and they hated each other for many other reasons, but they kind of attached themselves to the overarching philosophical differences. The sort of the political theology of the day, of the Middle Ages, pro-papal or pro-imperial. So anyway, Urban, in furtherance of his design, was traveling to get the Guelphs in these Italian city-states to support the French, the younger brother of the King of France, Charles of Anjou, against the von Hohenstaufens. So he was going to pull a switch and to install Charles of Anjou as King of Naples, Sicily, and the south of Italy, so that even if the Hohenstaufens retained northern Italy, it was to avoid the encirclement of having the Hohenstaufens control both Lombardy in northern Italy and Naples in southern Italy. All right. In the course of these travels, Urban got sick, and he died on October 2nd, 1264, after a reign of 3 years and 1 month. Guy Fossois was born in St. Giles du Gard in the Languedoc, the southern France, region of southern France. Born on November 23rd, 1190. His father Pierre was a successful lawyer. His mother was Italian-born, Marguerite Ruffi. Initially, Guy chose a military rather than an ecclesiastical life. He enlisted to fight against the Muslims in Spain. When he returned home, he followed in his father's footsteps. He studied law at Toulouse. He achieved, as a lawyer, he went to the capital in Paris. He achieved success in Paris and came to the attention of King Louis IX, St. Louis, King of France. The king appointed him as one of the core of his royal secretaries. Guy married the daughter of Simon de Malbois. Together they had 2 daughters. When his wife died, Guy once again followed his father's example and entered the church. When Guy's mother died, his father retired and went into the church. So now Guy does the same thing. He was ordained a priest in the Abbey of Saint-Malgois in Paris. He was appointed pastor of St. Giles in 1255. 2 years later, it's feudalism here. 2 years later, he was ordained bishop of Le Puy, then archbishop of Narbonne, then cardinal of Santa Sabina. And during that last period as cardinal, he also served as papal legate to England for 2 years, from 1262 to 64. Pope Urban IV died in Perugia, and so the conclave was held there. He died on October 2nd, 1264, and the conclave was held there in Perugia. Since Urban died before finalizing arrangements for an alliance between the Holy See and the Lombard and Tuscan Guelphs with Charles of Anjou against Manfred of Sicily, who was illegitimate but still a Hohenstaufen, the cardinals were unsure how to proceed because Urban hadn't finished the work. So should they elect someone who was going to pursue that, or should they pick a different policy? Not all of them were convinced that inviting essentially a French army into Italy to fight against a German army in Italy was necessarily a good thing for Italy. So the conclave lasted 4 months with no pope before deciding on someone who was not present at the conclave. So none of them wanted the job, so they just voted for someone who wasn't present. And that was Cardinal Guy Fossois. At the time, he was on a mission to France negotiating with King Louis IX about the arrangements for, that Louis was going to support his younger brother Charles of Anjou in moving into Italy. So Guy didn't even know that the Pope was dead. So until the guys show up, the messengers show up, say, "Oh yeah, Pope Urban died, and congratulations, you're Pope." Surprise. The conclave reached this decision on February 5th, 1264. When the messenger reached Guy Fossois on February 15th, he was horrified. At this, he didn't want to be Pope, and he was going to refuse. But he was persuaded by the French king, Louis IX, who promised French support for him and for his endeavor of keeping the Holy See free of Hohenstaufen attacks. Well, he couldn't stop an attack, but if it was that he promised French support and defense against Hohenstaufen attacks. And so Guy Fossois became Pope 183, ruling under the papal name Clement IV for 3 years and 9 months. A testament to the effectiveness of Hohenstaufen anti-papal efforts, Ghibelline efforts, is found in the necessity for Clement to enter Italy in disguise and to avoid the city of Rome altogether. He set up his papal court in Viterbo to wait. Meanwhile, Louis IX kept his word, as did Charles d'Anjou, and Charles engaged with French support, engaged and defeated Manfred von Hohenstaufen at the Battle of Benevento on February 26th, 1266. And in return, so he kept his side of the arrangement, in return for which the Pope sent cardinals to crown him King of the Two Sicilies. They said that, but it's Naples and Sicily. Naples on the mainland, and Sicily's the island off the coast. Charles of Anjou then solidified his control of the island of Sicily by a battle, Tagliacozzo, on August 23rd, 1268. During which, in the course of that battle, he captured Conradin von Hohenstaufen, who was was a grandson of Frederick II von Hohenstaufen, captured him and beheaded him. We already mentioned him. That's the guy who became emperor at 2 and was beheaded at age 16. These French victories, enabled Pope Clement IV to return to Rome and facilitated the Guelph, a pro-papal takeover of many of the Italian city-states. In retrospect, this campaign turned out to be the end of Hohenstaufen involvement in Italy. So the Holy See won that multi-generational conflict. However, the introduction of another non-Italian ruler in Italy, meaning the House of Anjou, the French House of Anjou, would bring an entirely new constellation of problems for future popes. Meanwhile, chronologically, in February 1265, Pope Clement summoned St. Thomas Aquinas, the Dominican, to Rome to serve as papal theologian. And there, Aquinas simultaneously served as master for the Dominicans in Rome, and specifically the existing. Previously, when we introduced the Saint Dominic, we saw that Pope Honorius deeded over to them the Santa Sabina in Rome in 1222. And they established a studium conventuale, a school, a conventual school, priory school there. Aquinas, when he went in 1265, he transformed that into a provincial school, Studium Provinciale, which included a studia for philosophy. So this is an intermediate school between the conventual school and the Studium Generale, general school. I mention all this because that studium, that upgrade of Aquinas, that was the forerunner of what in the 16th century became the College of St. Thomas at Santa Maria sopra Minerva. And that was the institutional ancestor of the current Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, conventionally referred to as the Angelicum in Rome. In the same year, 1265, the Mongols re-enter our story. We've met them earlier actually as early as the patristics courses, and then again in the medieval course. The Mongols are, as their name suggests, from Mongolia in East Asia. So they are north of China. So they're not Chinese. Ethnically, they are not Han Chinese. Completely different ethnic group, different language, different culture. Although they did steal a great deal they imitated a great deal from the Chinese, including the stirrup and the composite bow. They imitated both of those from the Chinese, and they caused a great deal of trouble with those two imitations. So just as Michael VIII, the Byzantine Emperor Michael VIII, was completing his reconquest of Greece from the Latins, he was confronted by troops of the Mongol Horde, the so-called Golden Horde, the Mongol Golden Horde. So to catch up with them, Genghis Khan, born 1162, reigned 1206 till his death in 1227. He was a tribal chieftain among the Mongols, who in 1206 began expansion through conquest, which turned out to be the largest contiguous land empire in history. At its greatest extent, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean in the east to the Danube River in the west, and from the Arctic Circle in the north, south to the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. It encompassed 22% of the land surface of the earth, 12.7 million square miles. Upon Genghis's death, he did another one. He subdivided. I mean, they spend their lives building these and then just divide them. I don't know. He divided his conquest among his sons. The two heirs of one of those sons each ruled a Mongol horde. So Genghis was called the Golden Horde from the flag. It was a white flag basically a gold flag, white and gold. So the Golden Horde. So his two grandsons divided it, and so one was the Blue Horde, the other was the White Horde. Again, referring to the color of their flags. And of course, there's zero possibility of that, enduring. Between 1259 and 1262, these two hordes slaughtered each other, with the result being a reunification a new Golden Horde, controlling Russia, Ukraine, and the lands on the northern shores of the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. In Russian history, this second Golden Horde, they're called the Tatars. Tatars. Because the Mongol tribe the Russians first encountered called itself with a word that sounded like ta to the Russian ear. So that's, So for those of you, and well, never mind. I'm going to just leave it at that. So the Tatars. I know it doesn't sound right, but that's what I know. In 1265, this new Golden Horde decided to extend its conquest, go back on the warpath, by invading Hungary and Thrace. The Byzantine Emperor, Michael VIII, tried to stop them in Thrace, but his army was exterminated in a battle that lasted less than an hour. He made peace by paying a bribe, basically. They called it tribute, but it's a bribe, protection money. And by giving two of his daughters in marriage to the Mongols. And at the time, the Mongols were pagan. So he was, anyway. The Mongols at the time worshipped Tengri, that's the sky. And later they converted, in the next century, in the 14th century, they converted to Islam. But at this point, he was giving his daughters to pagans. But he had just retaken lands from the Latins, and he was not about to lose them to the Mongols. So to a man who blinded an 8-year-old boy because he might one day become a rival, the sacrifice of two daughters to pagans was not even a blip on this guy's moral radar. The appearance of the Mongols in the region added a new element. As Hungary is the Danube, so Budapest is the Danube River goes right through that. So now the Mongols are in southeastern Europe. That's a new element to the equation that had yet to be balanced. 1265 through 1267. While Aquinas was at Santa Sabina in Rome teaching, he began the Summa Theologica, as a textbook of a full course of theology. Pope Clement IV died on November 29th, 1268, after a reign of 3 years and 9 months. His death was followed by a sede vacante, meaning a vacant seat, vacant chair, vacant throne, meaning no pope, for 2 years and 10 months. So almost 3 full years with no pope. Only 2 months short of 3 years. From November 1268 until September 1271. So, how did this happen? There were 20 cardinals who were eligible to vote. One of them never did make it to the conclave. 3 of the 20 died during this sede vacante when they couldn't make up their mind. And one of them, as we'll see, just resigned. He officially wrote a document saying, I forfeit my right to vote for a pope, and he just went home. And they'd still, after all of that, the only way they resolved the impasse was to elect someone who was not present and who was not even a cardinal. So the reason, of course, for this, the deeper underlying reason is, of course, demonic manipulation. Long existing rifts, ambitions, jealousies, hatreds, which we've covered certainly all in the last year's course. There were the result was that there were 4 identifiable factions, and the pro-French faction, the pro-German faction, the Italian house of Orsini, and the Italian house of Annibaldi. So 4 factions all wanted to be pope. But in a group that small, officially 20 cardinals, but only 19 at first voting, and then you ended up losing 4 of the 19. So none of them could get a majority. Clement IV died in Viterbo, so the election was held there, beginning with Mass in the cathedral, then into the bishop's palace for deliberations. Charles of Anjou was present in the city for the entire ordeal. I mean, not every day, obviously, he had other things to do because he had conquered Naples and Sicily, but he kept not just spies. I mean, he periodically he went there himself to protect his interest. In late 1269, frustrated by the deadlock, the cardinals just stopped regular meetings. They said, we're not even going to meet every day because it just ended up becoming shouting matches. The Cardinal Bishop of Ostia at that point was so disgusted that he formally renounced his right to vote and left, put it in writing. But the others remained in Viterbo, even though they didn't meet every day. They did remain in Viterbo. During this sede vacante, in 1269, Aquinas, St. Thomas Aquinas, returned to the University of Paris to teach theology. He returned in the middle of a renewed dispute over Averroes, whom we met in the medieval course. Averroes, remember, was an Andalusian Sunni Muslim commentator on Aristotle. Andalusia was Muslim Spain. A guy named Siger of Brabant. That's spelled Siger. And he was a canon in the Cathedral of Liesh in Belgium. He began teaching at the Sorbonne, the University of Paris, in 1266. The connection being, Siger was an exponent of an extreme version, an extreme interpretation of Aristotle, which he justified by a distorted reading of Averroes' commentaries on Aristotle. Siger asserted, now these are errors. I always hate to summarize errors, but these are going to recur. So seminarians, put in your notes this, heresy. The heresy number 1 of Siger, the double truth. That this erroneous assertion was that it is possible that a truth of theology could be false in philosophy, and vice versa. So that philosophical inquiry should embrace using reason alone without the encumbrance of faith. Sigur's erroneous assertion number 2, that there is a single soul, that there's a single intellectual soul of human. So like all of humanity, there's only a single soul for all of humanity. And each individual human partakes of that. So like the anima, the animating, the spirit, the energy that differentiates a living, speaking human from the corpse of a human. That is only by partaking of the single human soul. All right, so that's erroneous assertion number 3. That the physical universe is eternal, meaning it's uncreated. Now, he didn't quite go as far as the pantheist and assert that the physical universe was itself a divinity, but he came pretty close by asserting that it was uncreated. It just always was. So it's either divine or it's something apart from the divinity, but co-eternal with the divinity. So obviously all 3 of those things are wrong. from the perspective of Catholic teaching. Aquinas vigorously disputed Siger, both on his positions as well as his distortion of Averroes, and by extension, his distortion of Aristotle. Siger was quite properly condemned for these three errors by the Bishop of Paris. This is another one now. We've met a few of these. This is Bishop Etienne Tempier, Tempier. The rigor of this dispute informed Aquinas' efforts on the Summa, as he was still working on it. In no way do faith and reason contradict. Reason must work in the service of faith, and faith preserves reason from error. That's a summary of the Thomistic way of the faith and reason. As they both come from God, properly used, they both lead back to God. So if there's an apparent contradiction between faith and reason, we just have to study harder, until we figure it out. But since they both have the same origin, truth does not self-contradict. So, it just means we have more work to do if we don't understand how they do not contradict. By between 1265 and 1273, he was working on the Summa. Aquinas hoped that it could serve to end the pointless and destructive conflict over Aristotle in particular, and between the realist and the nominalist in general. And we've covered that, remember the nominalist, from the Latin word nomina, meaning name. That's an erroneous metaphysics, or which denies, either it denies that there is a metaphysics, there's anything beyond what we can perceive with the senses, or if it does, then we can't know it, so it doesn't matter. Meaning there's no objective truth. There's no objective good, true, beautiful, right, wrong. All we can do is assign them names, hence nomina, for the sake of convenience. Whereas the realist believe that there really is an objective truth. There really is a metaphysics, that exists before us and will continue to exist after us. So Aquinas insisted on an uncompromising unity of faith and reason as the necessary starting point. It's not the end. It's the beginning. You can't even, if you don't start there, then you're not even on the right road. So you're never going to get there. So the starting point is absolute unity of faith and reason in the search for truth. And ignoring a century before him of scholastic dispute on these questions, he returned to the original sources to the extent that they were available to him, meaning Latin translations of Plato and Aristotle, to which he then had access. Now, these were limited in extent, and as we've seen, because of the circuitous route, in some cases there were translations of translations of translations. But he used them in an interesting way, and the significance is often overlooked. He consistently, in the Summa, refers to Aristotle as the philosopher, capitalized. He refers to St. Augustine as the theologian, capitalized. And he refers to Peter Lombard as the master. Aquinas was attempting nothing less than bringing the corpus of pre-Christian philosophy into conformity with Christian revelation, faith and reason. It's one of the reasons the Summa is so long, is that he had a lot to do. To this end, the content of the Summa was arranged in 3 parts with 4 divisions. The prima pars, the part 1, is on God. So again, that's also the Thomistic way, as you start from top down. You start with metaphysics and work your way down to anthropology. So, you start with with God, the Trinity, and then work your way down to anthropology, which is us. So on the prima pars is God, existence, creation brought about by God, which includes the angels The prima secunda, which means the first part of the second part, it treats morality in general, principles of morality. The secunda secunda, the second part of the second part, deals with morality in particular, the virtues and the vices. And the tertia pars, the third part, deals with Christ, the sacraments, grace, the end of the world. And Aquinas left it unfinished. As long as it is, he left it unfinished for reasons that we'll see. The Eighth Crusade. St. Louis IX, King of France, had never been reconciled to his defeat in the previous crusade. And he was haunted by the memory of the men who trusted him, who followed him, and whose lives were lost because of his overly trusting surrender to Baibars. So as news reached Europe of one conquest after another by Baibars, leaving the Latins in the Holy Land possessing only the port of Acre, which is present-day Akko in Israel, Louis resolved to go once more on crusade. He was joined by Prince Edward of England, who one day would become King Edward I. So for those of you who watch the movie Braveheart, that's the character in there, the English king. They called him Longshanks. That's Edward I. Louis received some bad advice, and instead of going to the Holy Land, which, after all, was the purpose of the crusade, he was persuaded to attack Tunis in North Africa. So someone convinced him that if his army could be landed west of Egypt, that they could achieve strategic surprise and attack Baibars in Egypt when he was not expecting it. And that would enable them to secure the southwest flank and then march into the Holy Land through the Gaza Strip and start the reconquest from the south, whereas Acre, the existing Christian stronghold, was further north, so they could do a pincer movement. So that, I guess there was some strategic thought put into it. But what they hadn't considered, I mean, if you look at a map, where Tunis is where the Holy Land is, I think these guys have to walk to land in Tunis and then walk, take their horses wearing armor and walk from Tunis, from Tunisia across Algeria, across Libya, across Egypt, then fight a war in Egypt, and then if they won, then march into the Gaza Strip, into the Holy Land. It didn't work out. Instead, the Crusader army was stricken with a deadly plague, that probably typhus or cholera. And King Louis himself, died of this on August 25th, 1270, and much of the army with him. Prince Edward of England was there. He was a young man, and he did have genuine military talent. So he resolved to continue the crusade. And now, he had enough military, and he was already a seasoned, even though he was a young man, he was already a seasoned battle commander. He did what they probably should have done in the first place, which was reinforce the Holy Land directly by going to Acre, the last Latin city on the mainland. So when he took over, it's really a continuation of the Eighth Crusade because he was on the Eighth Crusade. But since the leadership changed, and since he actually brought them to the Holy Land, in some histories, this is referred to as the Ninth Crusade. In either case, Prince Edward was a general who might have changed the course of the Crusade movement. He had learned about the advantage that Baibars had, the tactical use Baibars made of mounted crossbowmen. And Edward felt he had a solution: the English longbow. In the hands of a master, it could put an arrow through a seashell at 300 yards. When Edward arrived in the Holy Land in 1271, he had 200 of them. He won 2 important battles and poised his troops to launch an attack on Jerusalem. But the plague in Tunis had reduced his numbers too greatly. To carry out a siege, he would need troops from the Latins in the east. The only sources for troops, Christian troops there, were in Acre on the mainland and the island of Cyprus off the coast. And on Cyprus, the man claiming to be the Latin king of Jerusalem was hiding in Cyprus. This was Hugh III. Edward, he some he met himself, and then others he sent messengers. And he encountered among them, even among the military orders, a sense of fatalism about the ultimate loss that they were going to face of the Holy Land. They just hoped that it would last their time. And that fatalism, that doom, that sense of doom and despair, rendered them incapable of the kind of initiative necessary to carry out his plan. Now, Baibars didn't know that. He had to assume the worst, as all successful generals do. So Baibars hired an assassin to kill Edward. But Edward was a trained knight, a trained warrior, and he killed the assassin himself, hand to hand. It was not until May of 1272, when Edward learned that King Hugh III, Latin king of Jerusalem officially, but in reality, on Cyprus, Hugh signed a 10-year truce with Baibars without consulting Edward. So then Edward he abandoned the crusade in disgust. He returned to England, and he became king. Actually, on his way back home, he found out that his father died. So he was crowned king when he got home. And instead, he spent the rest of his reign using the longbowmen to subjugate the rest of the British Isles, which caused Wales and Scotland a great deal of grief and suffering and loss of life. This, whether you call it the 8th or the 9th Crusade, was the last time that a European army attempted to liberate the Holy Land during the late medieval period. Outremer, the Christian kingdom in the east over the sea, fell officially 20 years later in 1291, which we'll get to in due course. And it would not be Christian again, would not have a substantial Christian presence again until after the Ottoman Empire fell in 1918, because they picked the losing side in the First World War. In the partition of the Ottoman Empire, the Holy Land fell to the British, became a protectorate. And it remained a British protectorate until after the Second World War, when Great Britain started to divest itself of its empire. And it divested itself of the protectorate in 1947. In the following year, Israel declared itself a nation, a Jewish state, and in 1948 won a war to make the point. And it has been, and it still remains the state of Israel, but has been in a state of conflict between Jews and Arabs ever since. There would be future crusades called to defend Europe from invasion by the Turks, who would continue to attack and even made it as far as Vienna, Austria, in the 17th century. Meanwhile, the papal election continued its preposterous course. So remember, all this time there's still no pope. They can't decide. So by this point, under pressure from Charles of Anjou, the prefect of Viterbo, like the mayor of Viterbo, Ranieri Gaddi, sequestered the cardinals in the palace of Viterbo, meaning he locked them in, on June 8th, 1270, to pressure them into making a decision. In March of 1271, the new French king, this Louis was dead. Louis died in Crusade, so he was followed by his son, King Philip III. So Philip joined his uncle, Charles of Anjou, in Viterbo in March of 1271. Together they exerted pressure, such that on September 1st, 1271, the cardinals agreed to create a committee of 6 from among their number, and they agreed in advance to accept whatever decision that committee of 6 formulated. So that committee, in desperation, looked outside of the conclave. Well, it wasn't a conclave yet. That term didn't exist. We'll see how that happens. So they looked outside of their group, outside the College of Cardinals. And they chose an Italian for Piacenza, Teobaldo Viscanti. He was not a cardinal, and he was not even in Italy at the time. He was actually on crusade. He at the time, he was in Acre. He had gone, well, we'll do his biography, but he had gone on crusade with King Louis, and then when Edward continued, he went with him. So, and he was there. So the apostolic sedevacante ended officially with the election of Teobaldo Viscanti, who became Pope 184. And this is Blessed Gregory X. Okay, by way of background, Teobaldo Viscanti was born in Piacenza around the year 1210. He entered ecclesiastical life in the household of Cardinal Giacomo de Pecorari, who was Bishop of Palestrina. Cardinal Giacomo was from his hometown, Piacenza, and was a family friend of the House Visconti. Teobaldo earned his trust and proved his competence, so he was entrusted with being oikomenos, which is like a steward of the household, the cardinal's household. In this capacity, he was with the cardinal on all the cardinal's assignments, which had the effect of introducing Teobaldo to all the important churchmen of the time and to the younger clerics in their service who one day would become important in their own right. So these assignments included legatine missions of the cardinal to Tuscany in 1235, Lombardy, 1236, Provence, 1239. As a reward for his loyalty and to increase his income, he was appointed canon of the Basilica of San Antonio in Piacenza in 1239. Teobaldo's patron, Cardinal Giacomo, died on June 25th, 1244, at which point Teobaldo was hired by the Archbishop of Lyon, Archbishop Philippe. And he hired him in the same capacity to run the household. The following month, July of 1244, Pope Innocent IV was forced to flee Italy by the armies of the Emperor Frederick II, that conflict we already covered previously, bringing Pope Innocent to seek refuge in Lyon, where he was working, in July of 1245. So Archbishop Philippe, Teobaldo's new boss then, became the unexpected host of the First Council of Lyon, the arrangements in which Teobaldo was intimately involved, introducing him to an even wider array of important ecclesiastical and secular figures. After the council, Teobaldo was rewarded with the appointment as Archdeacon of Hainault in the Diocese of Liesh in 1246. In 1262, Teobaldo went to Paris to study theology. This is obviously personal interest. This guy, he was already, he was not of a student age, but so this was just personal. And since he had a good benefice, he could afford to do it. During this time, he met and befriended St. Louis IX, the King of France. So joined him on crusade in 1270 and remained with Prince Edward after Louis died. So Teobaldo was in Acre in the Holy Land when messengers from the cardinals brought him the news, surprise, you're the new pope. So the pontiff-elect, Teobaldo, departed Acre on November 19th, 1271. Now remember, he's not only is he not a cardinal, but he's not a bishop either. And that's an absolute constituent, like the Pope must be Bishop of Rome. So he departed Acre on November 19th, 1271, reached Viterbo on February 12th, 1272. There he announced that he would reign as Pope 184 under the name Gregory X. He was not a bishop, so he had to be ordained before he could be crowned. And he wanted that done in St. Peter's in Rome, not in Viterbo. So everybody had to pack up and go to Rome. So the actual coronation took place in St. Peter's on March 27th, 1272. After his coronation as Pope, Gregory X immediately set in motion the machinery for summoning a new ecumenical council. He convoked the council, meaning he sent out the invitation, on March 31st, 1272, announcing that it would meet at Lyon, the second to meet at Lyon. He outlined three themes, three goals, three objectives, three things they had to worry about. First, reunion with the Greeks. Second, another crusade. And third, church reform. Specifically papal elections, because of the ridiculous 3-year sede vacante that the church had just experienced. Now, as we've seen, he had personal acquaintance with King Edward, with Prince Edward, who now became Edward I. He had experience on crusade. He knew everybody. And he had been through the previous church council at Lyon on the organizational level. So he was, ideally suited to do this. Among his other problems, that he inherited a vacancy in the position of Holy Roman Emperor. And he had the satisfaction of presiding over a reset of that after the multi-generational Hohenstaufen church-state disputes. On October 21st, 1273, the imperial diet at Frankfurt chose as Holy Roman Emperor the Duke of Austria, who was Rudolf von Habsburg. He became Rudolf I, the Holy Roman Emperor. With only one major exception, the Habsburgs remained loyal to the Church, and they retained the position of Holy Roman Emperor, interrupted by a few usurpers, but they retained it until Napoleon ended the Holy Roman Empire in 1805. And afterwards, the Habsburgs continued to rule Austria until the dynasty fell in 1918 because they were on the losing side of the First World War. Pope Gregory X left on June 5th, 1273, to go to Lyon, and he arrived in mid-November, 1273. There, he met and cultivated the new king, Philip III, whose father, Louis IX, Gregory accompanied on crusade, and was with Louis when he died, which Philippe was not. So he was able to, tell him about his father's last days. On June 23rd, 1273, St. Bonaventure, much against his will, was informed by Pope Gregory X that he was to be Cardinal Bishop of Albano. It is said that the Pope's envoys, who brought St. Bonaventure the red hat, found St. Bonaventure washing dishes at the friary in Florence. And his hands were wet, so he asked him to hang the red hat on a nearby tree until he finished. Now, at the time, Bonaventure was the Minister General of the Franciscans. We already saw how that happened. In the same year, 1273, on December 6th, St. Thomas Aquinas had a mystical experience, a religious experience, infused grace. Which was so significant, so penetrating, that it changed his life. such that he ceased writing. He declared to his friend Reginald of Piperno, quote, "Such secrets have been revealed to me that all I have written now seems like straw." So ever read the Summa? Imagine the effort, the work, the labor that went into that. And then it just say, well, that's all. It's nothing. It's straw. Not knowing this, Pope Gregory had already sent a message, an order to Aquinas to attend the Second Council of Lyon. So out of obedience, Aquinas set out. He was exhausted. He was riding a donkey, and maybe he fell asleep, or maybe he was distracted. But his head struck a branch, a low-lying branch, and he knocked him off, and that caused a serious injury, a hematoma. So he was traveling. He wasn't alone, of course. There was a whole group of Dominicans going to the council. So they brought him to the nearest place they could, which turned out to be a Cistercian monastery at Fassanova, and he died there. I guess some kind of brain hemorrhage or something. He died on March 7th, 1274, without ever reaching the council. But Bonaventure did make it to the council, as we'll see. So, the Second Council of Lyon. This is the 14th Ecumenical Council, counting Nicaea I in 325 as the first, and Vatican II as the 21st, so this is the 14th. It opened on May 7th, 1274, met for 6 general sessions in the Cathedral of Lyon, which is under the patronage of St. John the Baptist. 6 sessions in March, June, and July of 1274. May, June, and July. Attendance was impressive for the time. I mean, considering all these people had to walk. 300 bishops, 60 abbots, more than 1,000 other prelates or their procurators, representatives of the universities. King James of Aragon in Spain actually attended himself, and representatives of other kings attended, from Germany, England, Scotland, France, Sicily, also representatives of Norway, Sweden, Hungary, Bohemia, and Poland. 28 constitutions were approved. The Pope promulgated the collection of documents on November 1st, 1274, and there were 3 post-conciliar constitutions added to it, bringing the total number to 31. So 31 documents. St. Bonaventure was present at the first 4 sessions, 4 out of the 6 sessions. He addressed the council twice, on May 18th and on June 29th. But while the council was still in session, he died on Sunday, July 15th, 1274. His secretary, Peregrino of Bologna, believed that he was poisoned by anti-mendicants. The funeral oration was delivered by a Dominican, not a fellow Franciscan, but a Dominican, Pietro of Tarantasia. At the time, he was a Cardinal Bishop of Ostia, and he is going to become Pope Innocent V. So, among the things that the Second Council of Lyon discussed was another crusade. As Gregory had been on the crusade, he understood why it failed, and he was really heartbreaking because he thought Edward could have retaken Jerusalem if he had had enough troops. So, in support of this, Gregory proposed, and the council agreed, that for 6 years, a tithe was imposed on all the benefices of Christendom for the crusade. So that's 10%. Tithe is a tenth, so it's an additional 10% tax on all benefices for the crusade. On July 4th, a genuine curiosity occurred. Mongol ambassadors appeared at a Catholic Church council. So these ambassadors were sent by Akaba Khan of the Ilkhanate. The Mongol, after being defeated by Baibars, the Mongol horde, the second Golden Horde, once again disintegrated into different constituent smaller parts, and this Ilkhanate was one of them. And this Akaba Khan was a fourth generation descendant of Genghis Khan. So what were they doing there? Well, they wanted an alliance. They believe that the Mongols actually wanted to join a crusade against the Arab Muslims. Because remember, they're still pagan at this point. The Mongols are still pagan. And in exchange, if the Christians would help, say they thought, okay, we'll ally with the Christians, then we'll be able to conquer more territory. So they wanted Egypt. And in exchange, they would help the Christians reconquer the Holy Land and then let the Christians have the Holy Land. And the two ambassadors accepted baptism as a gesture of good faith. Given that these guys worship Tengri, and they were baptized. They showed up on July 4th and they were baptized on July 16th. So, anyway, the crusade never took place. Second item was ecumenical, healing the schism between Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic, which had existed since 1054, which we covered in the medieval course. In 1273, Pope Gregory X prepared for this, began preparing. He sent an embassy to the Byzantine Emperor Michael VIII, Palaeologus, whom we've already met. And Michael responded. Now, like the Mongols, it was military necessity. He wanted Christian help. He wanted another crusade, but just because he needed military assistance against, to survive. On June 24th, 1274, his delegation arrived, the Byzantine delegation arrived in Lyon, which had some senior people, the Patriarch of Constantinople, the Bishop of Nicaea, a guy who was a senator, and some others, an interpreter, a logothete, some other people. But that's the big Constantinople, Nicaea, and a senator, so important guys from church and state. They presented to the council a letter from Emperor Michael, signed by 50 archbishops and 500 bishops, was read into the record. On June 29th, the feast of Saints Peter and Paul, Pope Gregory celebrated a Mass in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Lyon. During that Mass, the Epistle, the Gospel, and the Creed were read or sung in both Latin and Greek. During the Creed, the Filioque, quies patre filioque procedit, the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son, was sung 3 times by the Greeks, because that was one of the points of contention that they said that was just a Latin edition, was not authenticated by a council. So by doing this, they, as representatives of the emperor, they accepted that the Filioque was legitimate. On July 6th, after a sermon by Peter of Tarente, who was future Pope Innocent V, and a public reading of the emperor's letter, the Greek ambassadors promised fidelity to the Latin Church and promised protection for Latin Christians in the East. That if they succeeded in retaking the Holy Land, that Latin pilgrims would be free to practice the Latin rite in visiting the East. So Gregory X then intoned the Te Deum. The Pope then wrote a letter of his own to the Emperor Michael on July 28th, officially promulgating the reunion of Greek and Latin. Now, this union was not accepted just by the ordinary people among the Greeks, the Orthodox in the East. Michael's the eighth son and successor, Andronicus II, repudiated the union in 1285. So the schism between the Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic continues to this day. Next item on the agenda, religious orders. So at the council, some new mendicant orders were suppressed, and the formation of new ones was forbidden without papal approval, and that it stipulated that approval was not even to be sought until a certain list of conditions was met. However, the council did approve 4 existing mendicant orders: the Franciscans, the Dominicans, the Carmelites, and the Augustinians. So this settled, at the level of conciliar magisterium, settled the question of whether or not the mendicant way was a legitimate form of religious life in the Catholic Church. Obviously, the answer is yes, it was, because the council approved 4 of them. There was another proposal that for the Crusade, because a shortage of troops was one of the problems, is that the Pope and the council would forcibly unite all the military orders into one. But they abandoned the idea because there were some military knights there, and some of the guys were related to them, and they said, well, no, we're not going to do that. And so then, they foresaw this scenario where they would order, say, the Templars and Hospitallers and Teutonic Knights and Knights of St. Lazarus, and order them to unite, and then they would say no. Well, then what? I mean, how are you going to force them? They're the most highly trained fighting men in the Christian world. And so then you'd have the humiliation of an order that would be ignored. So rather than do that, they let it go. And the Conclave. So to avoid a repetition of the ridiculous and inexcusable 3-year sede vacante that preceded the election of Gregory X, the Council of Lyon II created the conclave procedure that is largely still in place today. There have been a few changes, particularly the size of the number of cardinals has been expanded over the centuries. But the basic procedure as instituted is largely still in place. And the Holy Roman Empire. So on June 6th, Rudolf I von Habsburg was recognized by the council as King of the Romans and future Holy Roman Emperor, thus formalizing at that level recognition of the new dynasty. So he had already been chosen by the Germans, by the Diet at Frankfurt. So now, and we've seen how many people are there. All the nations are recognized. So it's good for Rudolf. I mean, it's a new dynasty, so it has this added legitimacy of papal recognition, conciliar recognition, with representatives of so many nations present. Okay, so of the 31 constitutions, we're not going to go through all of them, but a few we have to mention. Constitution number 2 is on the Trinity. So this is specifically the Holy Spirit, because the Filioque clause, the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. Whereas the Greek version, the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father through the Son. Right. And I'll just read, quote, "We profess faithfully and devotedly that the Holy Spirit proceeds eternally from the Father and the Son, not as from 2 principles, but as from 1 principle, not by 2 spirations, but by 1 single spiration." And then it goes on. So seminarians, if you want, you can read that, but I'm sure you cover that in your Trinity class. Okay, Constitution number 2. which is ubi periculum. This is a papal bull, but it was promulgated during the council, so was Constitution number 2, dated July 7th, 1274. And this created the papal conclave procedure as the way to elect future popes. So a couple of excerpts. Quote, where there is greater danger, so ubi periculum, that's the beginning of the letter, there must certainly be greater foresight. We learn from the past how heavy are the losses sustained by the Roman Church in a long vacancy, how perilous it is. We decree that if the Pope dies in a city where he was residing with his curia, the cardinals present in that city are obliged to await the absent cardinals, but for 10 days only. When these days have passed, whether those absent have arrived or not, all are to assemble in the palace where the Pope lived. Each is to be content with one servant only. In this palace, all are to live in common, in one room, with no partition or curtain. Apart from free entry to a private room, the conclave is to be completely locked, so that no one can enter or leave. No one may have access to the cardinals, or permission to talk secretly with them, nor are they themselves to admit anyone to their presence, except those who, by consent of all the cardinals present, might be summoned only for the business of the immediate election. It is not lawful for anyone to send a messenger or a written message to the cardinals or to any one of them. Whoever acts otherwise is to incur automatic excommunication. In the conclave, some suitable window is to be left open through which the necessary food may be served conveniently to the cardinals. But no entry for anyone is to be possible through this way. And then, let's see, it goes on. If, which God forbid, within 3 days after the cardinals have entered said conclave, the church has not been provided with a shepherd, they are to be content for the next 5 days, every day, both at dinner and supper, with one dish only. If these days also pass without the election of a pope, henceforth only bread, wine, and water are to be served to the cardinals until they do provide a pope. Then it goes on. Okay. All right. You get the picture. So it's so conclave means with key, so that it'd be locked in until they get the job done. All right. Constitution number 13 is addressing part of the feudalism problem. Is about just wealthy aristocratic families just sending their sons into church without a vocation and without preparation. So Constitution 13, no one is to be appointed parish priest until he is 25 and approved as to knowledge and morals. Constitution 14, another part of the feudalism problem. No one may henceforth presume to give a parish church in commendam to anyone under the lawful age and not ordained a priest. Such a commendatory may have only one parish church. Okay, so remember we talked about benefices. In commendam originally meant a benefice that did not include care of souls. So just a source of income. Whereas, but obviously because it's addressing it, that it was being abused, that there were benefices with care of souls that were being treated as if they were in commendam. So that's why it specifies a parish church that obviously has care of souls. So that could not be given as a benefice, as if it were a benefice without care of souls. That, if someone accepted the parish, then they had to serve the parish. Skipping down, Constitution 22, dealing with another part of the feudalism problem. on the alienation of church property, which means being stolen. Now it says the laity, but that means the nobility. We're doing this, that they, the Duke arranges for his younger son, to become abbot of this monastery, and then as abbot he has charge of the property, so he sells it back to his father, for a penny an acre or something like that. So the Constitution 22 is forbidding that. Constitution 23 is dealing with the mendicants. We severely prohibit that anyone found henceforth a new order or form of religious life or assume its habit. We perpetually forbid absolutely all the forms of religious life and the mendicant orders founded after said council, meaning after that council ended, which have not merited confirmation of the Holy See, and we suppress them insofar as they have spread. As to those orders, however, confirmed by the Apostolic See, whose profession, rule, or constitution forbid them to have revenues or possessions for their fitting support, but whose insecure mendicancy usually provides a living through public begging. Of course, we do not allow the present constitutions to apply to the orders of preachers and minors, that's the Dominicans and Franciscans. Their approval bears witness to their evident advantage to the Church. Furthermore, we grant that the order of Carmelites and that of the Hermits of St. Augustine, the institution of which preceded the said General Council, may remain as they are. Okay, skipping down, Constitution 29 institutes some procedures about excommunication because it was being abused. So that someone has to be, if they're going to be excommunicated, they have to be informed in writing. The grounds have to be stated in writing, and the conditions for it to be lifted have to be stated in writing, and they have to be given a time period in which to do that, a grace period in which to do that. And then, the council ended. So Pope Gregory's health deteriorated. After he left, he had a hernia, and of course, that now that has to be treated surgically, but that they couldn't do that then, so he just suffered. So when he left Lyon, he had to travel very slowly, take a lot of rest. He departed Lyon in April of 1275. He arrived in Lausanne on October 6th, where he finally met in person the Emperor-elect Rudolf I von Habsburg. They met on October 20th, and Rudolf gave his oath of fealty to the Pope. Gregory made it across the Alps. That must have been torture with a hernia. But he never made it all the way to Rome. He stopped at Arezzo for Christmas of 1275, and he just didn't have the energy to move on after that. So he died at Arezzo on January 10th, 1276. He was buried inside the cathedral church. He died after a reign of 4 years and 4 months. Now we have, in quick succession, Pope 185, Blessed Innocent V. He died 5 months and 1 day after his election. He died on June 22nd, 1276. So for the sake of time, I won't do his whole biography. Pope 186, Pope Hadrian V, died 1 month and 7 days after his election. He died on August 18th, 1276. Pope 187, John the 21st, died 8 months and 18 days after his election. He died on May 20th, 1277. And then we get to Pope 188, Nicholas III. And he reigned from 1277 to 1280, so there's some things that happened there. But for now, we will pause with that, because I find if the files get too long, then it takes too long to render on YouTube. So we'll pause there, and we'll pick up next time with Pope 188, Nicholas III. For now, thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.